When most people talk about moving overseas as an American or Canadian or even any kind of Westerner, most people assume that Westerners are only moving overseas in order to save money. And while saving money is definitely a really nice perk of living in other countries, it's actually not the only reason why Westerners choose to move to other countries. And in this video, we're going to be detailing what a lot of those reasons are based on conversations that we've been having with other expats both online and in person.
Welcome to Entrepreneur Expat. I'm Justin.
And I'm Amanda.
And on this channel, we talk about everything to do with moving overseas, starting a location, independent business, and enjoying life, and just really having a life that you love and not a life that is tied to one specific geographic place or where you need to go into an office every day for 8 hours and just slave away behind a computer. We're not about that here. We're about creating personal freedom and more joy in your life. And if that's something that you're interested in, make sure to subscribe to our channel because we're dropping new videos every single week about how to do just that. And definitely give this video a thumbs up as well because it helps us out a lot with our mission of reaching 1 million entrepreneur expats and aspiring expats. And if you're ready to take things to the next level and start your own location independent business so that you can live overseas just like Amanda and I do, then you're definitely going to want to download our Make Money From Anywhere guide below this video. And we have an upcoming bootcamp where we're going to teach you how to get your first high-paying client online if you haven't already done that. So make sure you check out that link as well. You can find out all the information right below.
The spots are limited and we expect it to sell out because we will be teaching this live starting in early November. So click that link to check the dates, what the curriculum is, how it works. It will all be there below.
So let's jump into the first reason that so many expats love moving overseas. And that's that, well, frankly, we just feel so much more relaxed not dealing with the hustle and bustle and the grind that is just common in the day-to-day life in the US. I know Amanda can speak to this a lot because I think she noticed it even more than I did, just the difference of cultures and the difference in terms of the pace of life between, let's say, Miami and being here in Guadalajara, Mexico.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I've never said it on this channel. I've said it on other channels, but a few years ago, I was on my way to having $1 million business and I was chasing the American dream. And I had one of the worst burnouts of my entire life because, you know, it was the whole carrot on the stick situation that a lot of Americans have. If I just make this much money, everything's going to be great.
And that stick just keeps kind of pushing the carrot farther and farther away, as we've seen recent times.
And I didn't realize I had to go through like a whole deconstruction of this actually, and moving to Mexico helped with that. Meeting you also really helped with that because I met you on the other side of that epic burnout. But I was at a point where I was like, this is unsustainable. The way that we do work in the United States, the way we see work, the way we see business, the way that we see productivity is utterly unsustainable for a human being. And then I got obsessed with working, you know, smarter instead of harder. I ended up meeting you throughout that process. The rest of this is history between you and I. But then, you know, I came over here to Mexico because you were here and I started to see it even more. Now, what's interesting is that Mexicans work really hard. They're actually some of the hardest working people in the entire world, statistically. Mexicans are freaking hustlers. But what I would say is a big difference between, for example, the American version of hustle and the Mexican version of hustle is that Mexicans, by general rule, still have a lot of a community aspect. Mm-hmm. Whether it's their own family or their neighborhood or friends, there's less isolation here. And I think because there's less isolation here as a culture, then people tend to feel more relaxed. And Mexico's not the only country. We've seen expats who, for example, are in Africa, in Tanzania, and they're saying the same thing, that
people are less uptight.
Yeah, there's just more of a community effort in the society, and then that allows people to relax a lot more, whereas the United States is a lot more individualistic. It's a lot more, what can you produce?
And in the US, they talk a lot about really basically living to work. That's kind of the modus operandi there, is they live to work. And in most other countries in the world, they work to live. They work so that they can enjoy their life more, and they actually have lives. Like Amanda said, family gatherings, community, neighbors, friends that they can see. And you look at a lot of the other reasons that contribute to that. Like here, we can walk to our barber shops and coffee shops and restaurants. You don't have to get in a car.
Countries have like town squares, for example, or have better urban planning than the United States does, which just makes, I mean, we were just talking about this the other day where we don't even go to the grocery store. We just go to the butcher shops and the vegetable and fruit stands, and we can walk to each of them. It's not, in the United States, it's like, I gotta get in my car, I gotta go do this. Everything in the United States is stressful.
Yeah. Driving is really stressful.
Everything is stressful in the United States. Even small things become stressful because you have to drive to them and then you have to deal with traffic. And the United States, I think part of the reason why there's a lot of stress, I saw Aubrey Marcus talk about this on his podcast, the United States has a lot of what's called diseases of affluence, which is like you live in a very prosperous country, but you also have depression. You also have a lot of mental health issues. You have drug addiction. You don't see as much of that stuff in places like Mexico and other countries around the world, which then allows you to also be more relaxed because everybody's in a better mood instead of being so freaking uptight and sick all the time.
Yeah. And that brings us to our next point, which is being outside of the US, you really get a very unique perspective on economics, on geopolitics. You really are able to see things more how they actually are versus how your fellow countrymen have made them seem to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think this applies to anybody who leaves their home country, because even, I'll give you an example. This is a recent one on how the United States, for example, the media and how it's used. We recently had a hurricane, right, that affected both Mexico and the United States. It was Milton. With the Mexican news, and I noticed this, I was like, wow, this is like a stark contrast between the two countries. And from what I told, international news in general is more in alignment with what the Mexican news was doing. It was very calm. It was very like, hey guys, talking to people like they're adults. Like, hey guys, so there's a massive Category 5 storm near El Yucatan. Please take precautions. Please take this very seriously. It's very dangerous. Listen to your local officials. And that was basically it. And then I would go to American news because I have family in Florida. They're fine. They were in Miami, but I was keeping up on what was going on. And it was like, it's the apocalypse. Everybody's going to die and blame all the climate change deniers. And I was like, wow, this is really dramatic, sensationalized, and politicized. The United States media in comparison to international media, and a lot of Americans are just tired of it.
Yeah.
They're just, this is stressful. I don't want to deal with this anymore. And
so many people monetize that stress. They create more and more stress and more chaos in the real world and also on the news and on social media and so many other places because there's a lot of people that are benefiting from that and from having us in a high stress state where we also, like we were mentioning earlier, end up getting those mental health issues and physical health issues and not eating well. And it's all this kind of vicious cycle that people are profiting from, if we're being honest.
yeah,
A lot of people.
Yeah, a lot of people are profiting from that. I know other countries have more strict laws in terms of what the news is able to do. So that could be a contributing factor to that. But you know, when you start living in multiple countries, the other thing that you notice is there is no such thing as a perfect country. A lot of people are in our comments and they're like, well, Mexico has all these problems. And we're like, yes, it does. There is no such thing as a perfect country. They're like, well, what do you do when Mexico goes to shit? We're like, pick up our online business and go somewhere else. That's the whole point. So the idea that there's this like perfect country or this, it's non-existent when you live in other countries, because you realize they all have their pros and they all have their cons, and you just have to kind of figure out, you know, what works for you and set up your life in a way where you have more mobility, because there is no such thing as a perfect country. And you start to realize like things are not that black and white. There's a lot of gray in the world. You start to notice that as well.
Yep. So the third reason that expats decide to move abroad is that you get to be more social, especially in countries in Latin America like Mexico.
Yeah, this is huge. This is something that a lot of people have reported back to us. So in the United States, it's difficult to be social, number one, because everybody's like working 3 jobs right now because 76% of Americans can't pay their bills. So everybody's just working. In the United States right now, it's also the culture in the United States. Also, the urban planning makes it difficult. Like you have to go all the way freaking across town to go hang out with your best friend. And here, it's not like that. It's like I was saying earlier. Other countries have town squares. They have better urban planning. The cities are a lot older, so they had to deal with that. And also, some cultures are just very warm and very social. Mexico is famous for that. Lots of Latin American countries are famous for that.
Yeah, and people are just nicer here and
People
more
are,
receptive,
yeah.
I think.
But even in Europe, where people have fama, they have a reputation for being a bit colder in Europe than, for example, Latin America, you still have good urban planning and town squares where people are able to be more social. And that is something that's more difficult in the United States. So again, it's that isolation factor in the United States that doesn't exist in most of the rest of the world.
Yeah. And that brings us to our next point, which is when you leave the United States, you tend to become a lot more resourceful. I know in my case, living in the US the majority of my life, but slowly becoming less of the majority as I'm outside of that country more and more, I tended to really rely way too much on technology, on established systems that were set to function, like a train or a bus or a subway that always runs at a specific time.
That is
And
one of the pros
there's an
of the United States.
information booth,
Yeah.
and you could find all the navigation instructions on Google Maps or Apple Maps or whatever. Here, yes, we have maps, and they mostly work, and systems mostly function. Internet is pretty decent. We have two just as a backup, but we also work online, so we kind of need to. But you tend to become more resourceful because you're not able to just rely on this expectation that everything around you will just work. And instead, you actually plan and you rely on other people around you. And maybe you actually go up to somebody and ask for directions. And that goes to our last point about being more social. When you're in a place where maybe things don't work either as well as you're used to, or to be fair, maybe they just work in a different way that you're used to. Here's one example. In the US, for the most part, the water coming out of the tap is safe to drink. Now, we could talk all day about heavy metals and toxins and fluoride and God knows what else they're putting in the water supply there. I don't drink tap water for the most part when I can get away with it, even when I am in the US. But in other countries, like Mexico, you can't drink it at all. So you've got to find a water delivery service, or maybe go to the local OXXO, which is kind of like our 7-Eleven here, and go and buy a big jug or a big garrafon, as we call it, of water. There's different ways of doing things and different ways of living life that are more conducive to being successful here and to enjoying life here. And it's not just what you learn in the doing of those things, but if you look at it from a very meta perspective, it's in understanding that not everything is exactly as it is in your home country, and learning the different ways that people live, the different ways that people interact, the different ways that systems, even banks and internet systems and housing and everything else works. Visas and everything like that, government institutions. And so it makes you think a lot quicker on your feet, and it does make you a lot more resourceful.
It makes you more of a creative thinker and a better problem solver. Now, people might think, oh my God, that's terrible. Why would I want to deal with all of that? Well, what a lot of you guys have told us when we've had conversations with you, you've been to Nicaragua, you've been to El Salvador, you've been to Africa, you've been all over the place. And you all have told us the same thing, where you're like, yeah, you know, these people have less, or maybe the systems don't work as well, but they're a lot happier.
Yep.
For some reason, right? And again, it goes back to those diseases of affluence that, you know, once everything gets too easy, then you get a little lazy, right? And then things kind of throw you off a bit more, a lot more easily. But,
very true.
And people would think, okay, well, that's terrible that you have to buy your water and you just can't drink from the tap. And, you know, as entrepreneurs, we would say it's actually kind of the opposite, because number one, it keeps your brain active. Number two, You learn that you can handle everything. And when you do that, you get extreme levels of confidence that a lot of people do not have, because you just have to deal with stuff like immigration. And that's not easy stuff to deal with. In fact, it's a pain in the ass most of the time. But when you get through these things, like I was thinking about this the other day, I was like, oh, our first year traveling full time and moving to another country was totally chaotic. But I was also thinking, I was like, oh, but I got through all that stuff. And because I got through all that stuff, now I'm more confident, for example, in my business. Because you build that confidence that you're a resourceful person. And if we want to get really meta about like money and woo-woo and money mindset and success mindset, your richness lies in your resourcefulness.
Not in your resources.
Not in your resources. So it's actually, let's call it character building.
I would wholeheartedly agree.
And that's a way of looking at it. And you've learned a ton of skills. I mean, you learned how to build a whole solar system.
I learned how to basically build a house. I mean, I renovated half of the house that we're renting in right now. I fixed toilets and gutters and air conditioning units, and I built a solar system in the house. What else? I fixed doors, fixed windows, weather sealed the entire, fixed the entire electrical system.
How does that make you feel though? Like in terms of confidence and as a person and your ability to just handle stuff?
Like a caveman.
Is that a good thing?
Yeah, definitely a good thing. Like a mountain man, like what's the word? Like a Renaissance man, kind of. It's nice.
And then the other thing is you are far more open to new experiences. For example, right, going back to the media point that we were talking about, how the media in the US is sensationalized and people are tired of it. And that's one of the reasons why they want to get out and they pit everybody against each other and people don't want to participate in that. You also start to realize, for example, most of the world is not as scary as you've been told.
And one of the biggest lessons that I learned traveling and being to over a dozen countries and living in several is just that. It's like in the US, because we're so isolated from the rest of the world in many ways, we think that everything is good inside the US, and outside the US,
there's just people dying on the streets.
Yeah, it's just dangerous and scary and all this other stuff is going on. It's like, no, that does happen in some parts of the world, and there are wars and there are a lot of very bad things going on in some places. But as a whole, there's a lot more positive experiences to be had by traveling, by visiting other countries, especially by living in other countries, than there are negative things. And I think it's really important that you allow yourself to be open to those new experiences, because back to the character building part, it allows you to really grow and build yourself as a person. And I think that that's one of the most valuable things that you can do in life.
Well, they call it the best education in the world, to travel.
Absolutely.
Often.
And that's why we love to do it so much.
And then, of course, there's the super practical stuff as to why people leave the United States. Cost of living, healthcare is a huge one that we hear all the time, access to healthcare. But overall, a lot of people, when I've noticed this in interviewing people who maybe left the United States earlier this year, and I even see it in myself. I see how I was doing videos in my business or my social media posts or whatever 3 years ago versus now, and I'm like, shit, I look like a completely different person.
It does. It changes you for the better, big time.
I'm far more relaxed.
Yeah.
Than I was before, and it's like a notable difference. And I've also noticed that when I'm interviewing expats, and that's one of the things that they say, there's just a notable difference in how relaxed they are and their quality of life once they leave. And again, people leave for a bunch of different reasons, and it's not just money. And they definitely stay for a bunch of different reasons. That's not just money, and that's what we've talked about in this video today.
So thanks again for joining us on this one. Make sure that you check out that bootcamp that we have coming up right below this video if you're interested in learning how you can start to build your own location-independent business just like we have. And we look forward to seeing you again on the next video. Thanks so much.